BBC Radio Manchester. Mike Shaft.
BBC Radio Manchester.
Last week we heard a bit about stained glass windows and that they're a form of art mostly associated with churches. Have you ever wondered about the people who make and maintain them? The Stain-Leaded Glass Company based in Bolton specialise in repairing stained glass windows and making new ones as well. I went along to find out about their work and spoke to their founder, Andrew Seddon, who this week tells me why stained glass windows were so important to churches and their congregations. So that's the domestic side of it, and let's talk about the other side. I think 99% of the population would see their stained glass in a church.
Yes, definitely.
So tell me about the role you play in that.
Again, we've been making stained glass. Stained glass in churches dates back 500, 1,000 years. You see the medieval cathedrals still with the original stained glass. And it was originally put into churches because people couldn't read. They couldn't read the Bible, they didn't have access to the Bible. And it was a good way of teaching people Bible stories and celebrating scenes from the Bible in a church and being able to sort of bring the Bible to life, really, in wonderful pictures around the church. And that was really what drew me to stained glass in the first place, was going into churches and just seeing the beautiful windows. Really drawn to it, and I wanted to do it myself. And that's how I got into stained glass in the first place.
But you say that's how you got in. It's not an easy thing to get into, is it?
It's not really. I started nearly 30 years ago, and this was before the days of the internet and YouTube videos, which show you how to do just about anything. My background, after I left school, I did an apprenticeship in engineering. I worked at British Aerospace for 10 years and became a chartered engineer. But I found myself in a job where it didn't really draw on all my natural skills. I loved making things from a very early age. I loved anything to do with crafts. I loved drawing and painting. And I found myself in a job, quite frustrating office job, which didn't really use any of my natural skills. So I found in my spare time, one of the hobbies I got into was stained glass, and I literally just picked up a glass cutter and had a go at it. I did a very short course. It was a little bit frustrating because it was like a once a week night class sort of thing, and I just wanted to do it more and more, so I just bought all the stuff myself. I read around the subject, I watched other people do it, and it seemed to bring together all the things which I was good at. So I was already good at art and drawing. I could draw and design, so I was naturally gifted at that. But also the things which I'd trained to do in engineering, I was a trained draftsman, so I could draw accurately and to scale. So all my engineering training all came in, and I also had an interest in construction. So I was interested in how houses were built and restored. So it all came together in the stained glass, and I think it's sort of suited my skill set really well.
You mentioned that you saw it, like we all do, in church. Are you a person of faith?
I wasn't always. When I started the business, I wasn't a Christian, but I became a Christian in 2001. And I think a lot of the reasons for that was through my work. I was obviously working in churches. I was looking at the windows. I was even designing windows based on biblical scripture. And I think a lot of that was going in. And the first window I designed was based on the parable of the sower. And that's always stuck with me because I researched it and I learnt about the parable. And I think that really did sink into me. And I think when I look back, I think God really did have his hand on my life all through that time, through the different windows and the different church windows I was designing and working on. And the people in the church who I met, I went and worked in a lot of churches, I met a lot of vicars, a lot of priests, a lot of people, church wardens, and I started doing talks to mothers' union groups and all different church groups. So I met a lot of Christian people. And I think it was through that exposure God showed himself to me, really.
If we go to church, it is likely that the lead stained glass window is going to be absolutely massive.
Yes.
Tell me about how difficult it is to work in those sizes, please.
You will find that even the biggest of stained glass windows, so you might go to a cathedral, it might be 30 or 40 foot tall, but the window itself will be made in smaller sections. And you might have this 30 foot window, but it might be made in 10 3-foot sections. So each section is placed into the stone and secured into the stone, and then the steel or bronze support bars which run across the stone. The stained glass has got little wires which are soldered onto the stained glass and then twisted around the steel support bars. Each panel is fitted on top of each other, but because they're all in line with the steel support bars, it looks like one continuous window. So you can actually take out a section of a much bigger window and leave the rest of it in place. Even the biggest windows come into smaller pieces. We have made some rather big windows. In fact, we're just making one at the moment. We've just drawn the design out full size. And sometimes it's not until you draw it out full size that you realise what you've let yourself in for. We've designed this window, and the window itself is about 2.5 metres tall and 1.5 metres wide. And we're now thinking, how are we actually going to make this thing? We are actually going to have to split it, even though the design's not got straight leads running right across. There are some curved leads across the design, so we can actually make it in sections and fit it just like the old cathedral windows, really.
And how do you move something that huge?
Yeah, very carefully. I think it's the best answer. Yeah, because stained glass, especially with all the lead, if it's a very intricate window, it can be very, very heavy. You can find that it will break under its own weight. And if you look at old windows of any size, you can see that how they've sagged over the years and started to buckle. Then that's really the reason they've got all these steel support bars running across. You do have to learn how to handle the windows. So once the window gets to, say, 1 metre square, they get very heavy and very difficult to lift them off the bench. You've got to be very careful. You've got to slowly slide them off or put them onto a board and then lift them up supported so they don't just break under their own weight, like I was saying.
Let me tell you, next week you'll hear the final part of that interview when Andrew shows me how to make a lead window. Absolutely brilliant. Time coming up on 7:30.